Go. All right. Welcome and good morning. So first of all, once again, I'm Christie Bruner with the St. Pete Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm Vice President of Advocacy. Glad to have you all here with us. This is our mid-session legislative update 2024 session. And I just wanted to kick off with sharing my screen and going to our website so I can make sure everybody knows what is available on our website for you to, let's see, maybe go to our website. Make sure to be able to access all things St. Pete Chamber and get your, I guess it isn't one, there it is, advocacy. Can you guys see that? All right. So this is our advocacy website. If you go to stpete.com/advocacy, and you can see our legislative priorities are here. This is what we put together at the end of 2023 with all of our committee work up to our public policy committee was approved by our board of governors. This is what we brought with when we went on our legislative visit collaboratively with the chamber in Clearwater, Amplify Clearwater, as well as Tampa Bay Beaches Chamber. So we went up with some regional focus. So you can click on this and read a little bit more about our legislative priorities. And then you can also click here for our week 1 legislative recap video. And then we'll also have a link to this below as well. If you want to get a little bit more involved with the chamber councils and committees, this is where you would do that. All of our committees roll up to the Public Policy Council. And then you can see our legislative committee is right here, along with our other committees. And you can click and be able to RSVP for those committee meetings. So that's a little bit of background about how you can find information about us. And I am going to go ahead and get our PowerPoint started and turn it over. Can you guys see the crazy? Let's just do this. There we go. Can we see that? All right, we're in business. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to John and Jessica.
Awesome. Thank you, Christy. And I think you can go to the next slide since we've kind of done our introductions. All right, so just looking at some of these big ticket items to update you all in kind of a state picture and a federal picture. Obviously, state picture, item number 1 is DeSantis is back and he's making his presence known. You know, when he dropped out of the presidential primary, the next day he killed a bill via Twitter that said essentially, you know, would help provide a taxpayer fund for politician legal fees. It was a bill obviously made to support President Trump. He killed that via Twitter, and in the last couple of weeks now, he's been sort of on this homeless encampment legislation that'll, you know, take action on cities that don't address the homeless problem in a way that the governor sees fit. So he's been really vocal about that. I was actually at the Florida Governor's Luncheon yesterday at the Florida State Fair that he ceremonially kicks off. And he even talked about this yesterday and how this is one of the issues with other states and leading to net migration. So all that to say, he's out of the presidential primary. He's talking about vetoes and a fiscally sound budget, and he's back and putting his nose in the policy. I think somebody asked, you know, if the governor was going to come back, or he made a comment at a press conference, you know, and kind of rest on his laurels. And he came out and said, you know, that's not who I am. I'm not going to sulk. I'm going to come out and I'm going to be in the policy and be engaged. So that's exactly what we've seen so far from him returning during session. For session, it's the halfway point. So day 32, you're really going to see subcommittees stop meeting. And, you know, we can talk more about that, but it's, you know, bills are dying, as everybody says. And then a new theme that's sort of emerged in the last week or so that I don't think is really super public yet would be that the House and the Senate are really not in agreement. And there's a few little fights that are out there brewing. So I think there's some concern about, does session end on time? Does that affect a lot of member priorities on what's able to get done? Because there's not a lot of agreement. And Jessica, I don't know if you have anything to add on that state picture before I talk a little bit about the federal stuff.
No, you recapped it beautifully.
Awesome. And then for the federal perspective, I think that first item, House continues in disarray. I feel like I've been typing that on updates for the chamber and internally at Baycare for the last year. But for the last year, the House has been in disarray. You saw a really interesting situation earlier this week where Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, had 2 votes fail, right? And I don't think, regardless of partisan politics, Nancy Pelosi never really brought anything to the floor if she didn't absolutely have certainty that it would pass. And you've seen the speaker kind of get embarrassed a couple of times. So that's really, really interesting to watch, as the chambers kind of have a dynamic back and forth. But a House priority, an Israel standalone aid package failed. The Mayorkas, who's the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, impeachment failed. Little interesting local tidbit on that. Laurel Lee, who's a congresswoman, new CD 15, Pasco, or excuse me, yeah, a corner of Pasco, Hillsborough, and Polk counties. She would have been an impeachment manager had that really been successful and still moving, but obviously it's not. Might still come back up, but lots going on in the House. From the Senate, they're still set to take up this $78 billion tax package that the House did pass. That, of course, has 33 billion additional in business tax cuts, and then 33 billion in expanding funds and access for the child care tax credit. And then on the border deal, or excuse me, just on that note on the tax package, the Senate is not in love with what was agreed to by the House Chair of Ways and Means, Jason Smith, and the Senate Chair, Ron Wyden of Senate Finance. Not in love with that agreement, but it's basically at a point where if the House passed it, and it's shocking that they did, the Senate can't really make changes. It'll have to go back to the House, and that puts the bill at risk. So it's basically a take it or leave it for the Senate if that's what they want to do and how they want to proceed. In terms of a border deal, the border deal was agreed to with Jim Langford out of Oklahoma. Didn't have support in the Republican caucus. Obviously, yesterday, a standalone aid package to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel did move through the Senate without the border. The border piece had sort of been the Republican response there. That is now, dead. The border deal that was agreed to with the House the senators. So all that to say, not a lot is great. Not a lot is sunny. Not a lot of agreement across the board in the two chambers. Just keep an eye. What does that mean for government funding on 3.1 and 3.8? There's two tranches of bills that fund the government. I think it's 4 bills that are up on 3.1, and the rest of the other 8 are up on 3.8. Think there's a lot of concern that, again, we might be looking at another continuing resolution or potential government shutdown with kind of what Congress is looking like right now. Okay, kind of getting more into legislative session, and obviously this is budget conversation too, but the dynamic, as we said, between the chambers has been interesting. So at the halfway point, subcommittees and the smaller committees, that it's typically the first committee stop for bills. Those are really, stopping meeting. And at day 50 at day 50, no committees will be able to meet. So when you think about weekend days and some of the other stuff, if your bill hasn't moved its first committee by now, it's likely not going anywhere unless it gets rolled up into a package, if it's one of those policy areas that has the opportunity for that. Now, back on the dynamic between the two chambers, this little table here is just kind of a way to look at some of these issues that they're kind of quibbling back and forth about. Hospital price transparency has been something the House has wanted for the last few years. That language is really something that's been federal, and it's about shoppable services and what needs to be listed online. I could give you my hospital talking points on it, but I'll spare you those and just say that that's been something the House has wanted, and they're trying to get that incorporated into the Senate President's priority legislation, the Live Healthy package. Also on that, and the Senate's had Live Healthy passed for some time now, a couple or at least 3 weeks. They're also concerned about the cost of Live Healthy, and it's ironic because last year the House had gotten this school voucher expansion that was some $1 billion. The Senate passed it and said, okay, great, we'll give this to you. Now Live Healthy is kind of like the Senate's return on that. Right now we've got our big thing we want to get accomplished, and the House has been reluctant, I'll say, to spend that much state dollar. They're sort of taking a fiscal hard line here. So that's been one dynamic. Attached as well to that voucher conversation, the Senate said, this year we passed the voucher legislation last year. This year we want to do some education deregulation to make it a little bit easier for teachers to maintain their certifications, to help school districts a little bit too. So that's kind of another trade-off attached to that, and the House hasn't really prioritized it. Social media for minors is a Speaker of the House priority item. That's something that has sailed through the House largely on bipartisan basis. But then going back to Governor DeSantis's involvement again, he's been a little vocal about this, sort of surprisingly. The governor has not been afraid to pass a bill that has, constitutional concerns. They'll just go defend him in court, has sort of been what we've seen out of their office. But he did say on this legislation that, there are some constitutional concerns on how you would implement it, on how you would ensure that, nobody below 16 has access and is not able to use certain social media platforms. The Senate has the House's bill. It's passed the full House. They're not taking that one up right now. They're moving their own bill that's a little more targeted, has a lot of carve outs for what constitutes a social media site. So we'll see again what that looks like, what the negotiations between the chambers are like. And an interesting tidbit I picked up earlier this week is, and I haven't validated these bills, so I'd have to go look them up to get the numbers, but there's a group of land use bills that the House had wanted to accomplish this year. And most of those are essentially dead in the Senate, haven't been moving at all. And the House in turn is holding up the Senate's priority, which is last year, live local, affordable housing, all that package. There's a glitch fix bill that would make some additional changes on zoning, et cetera. That is, the House is sort of slow rolling as a result. So that's just a snapshot of some of the things where there are more, they're in disagreement. And then the big thing is, right, the budgets. So they both passed their budgets this week off of their respective floors, and budget conferencing is set to begin. And just as an addendum to this, we'll talk a little bit more about some different tax bills that kind of are on the chamber's radar, but you've heard conversation about, or the governor's push really, deep tax cuts. The House has been fiscally conservative, but not willing to go quite so far in some of those tax cuts. But there has been conversation between the two chambers on, do we pare back some of those tax holidays that we've heard a lot about publicly the past couple of years. You've got the one on concert and venue tickets. There's a schools back to school sales tax holiday. There's of course the disaster and hurricane preparedness one. So they might talk about paring back maybe the time frame on some of that as well. So that's just some of the top line issues and kind of the dynamic between the two chambers. Okay, and this is kind of where we stand. There's a couple that I've added to this since you might have last seen it from people that had reached out. The two chambers now have passed their respective budgets, and this is where we stand from the perspective of some of the projects that matter to the members of the chamber. And overall, I would say it's pretty good that a lot of things are at least in one side of the budget, either the Senate or the House. You'll see pretty blatantly that the Senate is more likely to fund member projects. That's not just for St. Pete. That's an experience that we all endure or suffer. Separately for Baycare, we work on a couple of appropriations, and they are faring well in the Senate and not necessarily the House. The House is just, again, really much more fiscally conservative, so that's reflected here. The green means it was funded in that initial pass, which is a good sign. That means it was, not necessarily that it, a member priority, or it's something that it was easier for them to get passed through with leadership, that it was funded, that sort of thing. So, those are promising to see. If it's green right now, you've got to have some level of confidence that you might be able to hold the line and get the House to come online and fund as well. Blue is something that was amended in, and that's sort of a different process. It's something when I was staff, if you're in office and you have 10 projects in the initial budget and you've got them at, different dollar amounts, you might say, let me take a little bit of money from this one and get this project at least a placeholder in that budget, so it's in play, right? So when the chambers come together and begin negotiating, the House, or excuse me, the Senate would say, we've got this in our budget now because you amended it in. So still alive, maybe not feeling as great as if you were in the original budget, but certainly still a good opportunity to get funded. And then if it's something that hasn't been included in either budget yet, you've got to have some concern. You need to really be working to think, okay, is there an opportunity maybe to end up on a sprinkle list at the very end where leadership comes in and sprinkles? Definitely would want to have a conversation if you have a contract lobbyist and say, hey, what's our game plan here if your appropriation hasn't made it in either budget. Okay, so we put a nifty, and this is Jessica's idea, nifty little traffic lights on these to kind of reflect, I guess it's almost us guessing, what these do. Green obviously means looking good, looking like it'll move ahead. Yellow means could go, not red. Like, uh, so just needs, obviously, one of the biggest we've been tracking is the Pinellas Coast Transit Authority bill that would revise the membership of the PSTA and kind of dilute, I should say, the strength of the city of St. Pete, to kind of control that. It would make some lane changes. It would also define in state law what can constitute transportation. It would eliminate light rail and some of that stuff. It would really sort of tie hands here at the local level for what can be done. So we've got a lot of concerns about that. Obviously, a local member is carrying it. It did pass.
I think we just
We
lost.
just lost him. Yes,
Do you want to tag in,
Yeah.
Jessica? Oh, there's John again.
there he is. I think he was mid
Sorry,
recovering.
it's totally.
Well,
Take it away,
for a
John.
minute, yeah, for a minute I thought that was my problem. But John, can I ask you on the PSTA bill? I've heard in various meetings several variations on how it might be stopped. At one point, I understood that one member of the Pinellas delegation could stop it, and then I heard that wasn't right, that there was another step. What is the status of
It's
that,
yes,
and what are
but
the chances?
yeah, I would say that's a yes, but Paul. So yes, it can be pulled from an agenda. Just going back, local bills only move through the state house. They don't have a bill in the state senate, and that's just how local bills function. So once it came to the state level and was passed out of the Pinellas delegation, it's a local bill. It'll pass the House committees it's assigned, and if it does so, all of those local bills will get sent over to the Senate all at once. So there will be other bills about mosquito districts in Columbia County, all this other stuff grouped together. When it comes over to the Senate and is placed on that consent agenda, it'll be all of them, and they'll have an opportunity to vote them all up at once. An individual senator from the delegation that a local bill originates from, so in our case, Pinellas, can pull a bill off of that consent agenda and say, no, this is controversial. I don't want this to be taken up on the consent agenda. We need to separate this out. So at that point, the Senate could, agree to that, right? And they could then not agenda it the next day. So there's a kind of the Senate would have to say, yes, we want to retain this, and yes, we want this bill now to come up on its own the next day. At that point, right, that point right there is when we'll really need to be leaning into our local leaders. We have relative confidence that Senator Rousseau will help us get it pulled from that consent agenda. The next is going to be to make sure the bill doesn't come up alone the next day. So making sure our members that maybe aren't wants to publicly be against the bill, but maybe help us with some conversations to Senate leadership and say, hey, this is a little controversial. We need to take a little bit more of a look at it, something along those lines. Maybe this one doesn't come up on the Senate floor tomorrow. That would be the pathway. And I think there's a chance of that happening. I feel good about some of our local Republicans, not necessarily being fully on board with this and the Senate with this legislation.
Okay, good. Thank you, John. Because I think it's a terrible bill, and I guess we can only hope, based on the process you outlined, that in fact it doesn't make it through the process.
Yeah, when it goes over, listen, when it passes the House, I think when it passes the House floor, I think at that point is when any touch points with Senators Hooper, DeSegli, and Rousseau to remind them how we feel about this bill and how your business or anybody's business might feel about this bill, absolutely crucial. Letting them know that this is not our radar, that we still are very concerned, and that we would like this not to be passed through the Senate.
Yeah, again, not to take up too much time on this, but it really is so important to us, I think, directly. Christie, based on John's comments, are we going to do any follow-up with those three senators?
Yes, we've been in touch with all of them. We've been in touch while we were in Tallahassee. Since Tallahassee, we sent letters to Pinellas delegation when they had the meeting, so they all know, but we're going to continue conversations, obviously, and might do some outreach and advocacy asks of members as it gets down the line as well.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, and the local bills they do kind of become a local fight. And I think when you see members become apprehensive on them, especially in the Senate, sort of the more reserved chamber, going to be a little bit more deliberate. If they get the sense that this is controversial and that it's not wanted, they might not want to spend the energy and the willpower on this, and they might say, "Yeah, let's leave this alone." So that's kind of what it'll come down to. But I do think there were great conversations we had in Tallahassee, and we'll continue to have them as as this potentially moves along. On the local business tax bill, I know there's conversation that Christie shared with me on the city's perspective. Obviously, this would concern the city. Its local tax revenues would have been capped, right, based on what this bill has. There was a change in the House 2 weeks ago, but I do still think this is something that could be rolled up in a tax package, and that's kind of the next 3 items here: local business tax, childcare, early learning providers, and Florida Main Street. Even Florida Main Street, I would say it's really unlikely, but any of these provisions that deal with tax rebates or changes to what, how taxes can be created, those could be rolled up in a tax package that we'll probably see here in the next week. Typically what they'll do is they'll have a bill that has some policy they like, they'll hear it in 1 or 2 committees, and then when that tax package drops out of that committee, the committee chair will incorporate parts and pieces from other pieces of legislation. So that's just something to watch. I would say just on the 2 tax credits, and that would be the Main Street program and the child care. Thinking about the conversation we shared earlier, they're wanting to pare back some of the, the tax holidays because of the cost to the state. They're trying to be a little higher with the budget. Providing additional tax credits goes against that. So I would say those are both very, low percentage, but could still happen. Moving on to Live Healthy. Again, a lot of state money would be tied up in this bill, about $1 billion, I think $750 million. Really, again, Senate President's priority bill on kind of how she imagines changing healthcare in the state of Florida, improving outcomes, new training for doctors, funding for that, et cetera. The House is moving it along, but they do still have their price transparency language that might be a hang up for the Senate. So we'll see as that process continues to unfold. And then we've talked a little bit about this already, social media use for minors. It's passed the full House a couple of weeks ago on that bipartisan basis. It's been sent over to the Senate, and messages has one reference for one committee there, but it hasn't moved at all out of that. So the Senate's still continuing to move their own bill carried by Senator Grahl. And it's like I said, a little more targeted. It precludes websites that have different purposes, but might have a sort of social media component to them. But, if it's more messaging, or if it's more on photos, and it also has a kind of a social component, those would be excluded. So I think the Senate bill still intends to take on your Facebooks, your Instagrams of the world, but not get other side social media necessarily caught up in it, because they see those as kind of the big bad evil.
Oh, John, did you see the slide change?
Yeah, I see it. It just switched over. Sorry.
No problem.
We've shared a little bit of conversation about this as well. I think there's some concern here, and again, the governor's involvement has been heavy on this. He did say at the governor's luncheon, we're not going to be like California, like Chicago, like New York. We're not going to have these encampments. Talked about San Francisco, talked about how that's really benefited. Those situations have benefited Florida and our economy and net migration in the country. So that's of his perspective. I think this is the governor still talking to that now. He wants to stay in the world for 2024, depending on what happens with former President Trump. Maybe he's just trying to stay in the public eye for 2028. Either way, future speakers carrying this. It passed its second House committee stop yesterday, second Senate earlier in the week. This is going to pass. So I think it's really just watching this. And I know some chamber members have expressed concerns about it, I would say it's about thinking about, how can the local government handle it, and what can, we as a chamber maybe looking forward to next year say, hey, this is a particular problem, that sort of thing. Safe Waterways Act is a bill that Rep. Lindsay Cross has locally. Whenever you see a news report about bacteria, et cetera, in the water, there's not really a good state system for notifying that, for closing those public waterways down, and for letting people know that there are these issues in our water. So it's a really good bill, especially for what we've. It passed finally its first House committee this week, so I would technically alive, but it's not going to get heard in its first Senate.
Oh no, John.
It's so enjoyable, and it's really a good presentation.
I know, he's doing great. He's worked hard. Jessica, you
Yeah,
want to? Oh,
He definitely does a really great job at speaking.
so well.
I see John, you came on back. We're singing your
So
praises.
finally somebody
Sorry,
made
guys.
legislation interesting. It's awesome.
you have a fan club, John. You have a fan club.
That's good. I apologize for connectivity issues tonight. Won't be happening next. Just final on the bill. She does have a lot of good sponsors on this bill, and she does have a decent representative who's ability to move the Senate on what over the last few years. I would just say, it's.
I was gonna say, hey, John, we can't really hear you. Jessica, we might have you take over. There's only a couple more bills on here. Do you feel comfortable talking?
Yeah,
about those?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I know John was just wrapping up Safe Waterways Act. It did pass its first committee last week in the House and in the Senate this week. However, because a lot of those subcommittees that are left on the agenda for the Safe Waterways Act are not going to be meeting post week 5, the bill is likely not going to be moved forward unless it wraps up into another package. However, some of the packages that are left on the table, such as like an infrastructure or a tax package, you've got to have specific bills that are going to wrap up into that silo. And John and I discussed, likely just from our background knowledge, this one might not get wrapped up, but we're going to keep tracking it and keep a close eye on it. Our Senate Bill 1624, House Bill 1645, energy resources, preempts local governments in the regulation of natural gas resiliency, reliability, and infrastructure. So John and I were looking at this yesterday. It's all about utilizing clean energy sources. So if a city government is putting a resiliency plan that doesn't align with a third party organization, hey, John, sorry. You want to join in?
You're good, Jessica. Go ahead. I'll let you finish knocking out this one, and I can finish on Safe Waterways. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So once they're putting together their energy plan, if it doesn't align with a natural gas resiliency or reliability infrastructure plan with that third party partner, that's when you can get in check, kind of making sure we're utilizing green resiliency sources when we're coming up with our energy plans. It's not really moving in the House, but it's something just to keep in mind as we are prioritizing clean energy. And I don't know if you want to jump back. I did touch on Safe Waterways Act, John. So I don't know if you want to jump to the Live Local Glitch Fix bill.
Yeah, just and we've talked about this again in between the session, chamber dynamic, but it's only moved one committee in the House, and I think that was earlier on. So now it's been kind of paused. It's passed the full Senate. They're ready to go on this, but we'll see when things start really happening in the next 2 weeks. Once budget issues really get ironed out and the chambers start to like each other again, hopefully, that this will still Senate President priority, and there are concerns with how some of the provisions in Live Local have been implemented. So this would be their attempt to kind of edit those now. And then just on Safe Waterways, I think historically it's tough for a bill to pass its first session, right? And to get full, but getting members, getting positive votes, passing, having good co-sponsors is a good sign for next year. And hopefully we'll be able to help Rep. Cross get that across. All right, and then kind of open it up to you all if there's any other bills or appropriations we want to track. Happy to keep our eyes during this process on any appropes or bills for you. Can update you more regularly on them, etc.
John, first of all, thank you for doing this. I was at the chamber board meeting when you did it, but frankly, this has been much more useful to me than that one was. I don't know why, but anyway, appreciate it. I think I read a couple days ago that a couple of members, I think a Democrat and a Republican, got the notion of using citizens as the basic property insurance vehicle for everybody, and allowing the private carriers to deal with the other parts of, the other parts of it. I'm not sure I've got that right, but if it's anywhere near close, do you have any sense that that might actually move forward, given that, property insurance, I would argue, is, if not the most important issue these guys should deal with, it's right up there.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on it. I think you're talking about a bill by, I think, Rep. Spencer Roach had it in the House, and he's a Republican. He's based out of the area that, in Naples area, that Idalia, ravaged, that we saw. So I think this isn't going to pass this year from what I've seen. I think it's stalled at this point. But I believe the proposal was to kind of mirroring Texas and California, to have citizens carry all property insurance for catastrophic and hurricane coverage, and let the others step in, private market step in for the rest. So if it's happening in Texas and it's been status quo in Texas, I would say that even if it's in California, et cetera, even if the state doesn't like to have citizens be the insurer for all and doesn't like a big enrollment in citizens, I would say that there is still some likelihood it could happen, but not this year. I think it's more of a next year thought. They're still waiting to really see, and this is their perspective, I suppose, because some disagree, on how the property insurance reforms they passed last year might trickle into the market. The governor and others have been pointing to the lower numbers of those insured in citizens in the last couple of monthly reports. So I do think there could be traction on it next year. I don't think that Rep. Roach is going to let it go. And I think obviously he's rising. I want to say this might be his last year in the House. If not, he's got 2 more years after this cycle. So either way, he's got 1 or 3 years left. And I imagine he'll keep pushing it, especially as he rises in the chamber over there.
Good, thanks.
Yeah,
Love
he
it.
almost lost his house fully during the storm. So it's very close to him and his constituents. They don't understand, regardless of party affiliation. So I know who's going to stay on it.
Absolutely. I just wanted to know, we do have our next legislative meetings up here. Our goal is to do in-person legislative meetings will be the Friday before our public policy meetings. Our public policy meetings are in person every 4th Tuesday. So these legislative meetings will be right before that on the 3rd Friday of the month. So it'll be in person. And then we're doing a few of these Zooms in between during legislative session. So that one, March 8th, is that the last day of session, John? Yeah. So last day of session, and we'll wrap up with updates in just a couple weeks.
You say last day of session, Christie, but that's to be determined. It's scheduled to be.
Things don't always happen as scheduled. True. That's true.
That's right. Thank you, everybody. Sorry about connectivity.
No, we appreciate your time. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jessica. This is going to go up on our website. So if anyone would like to share it with colleagues or other chamber members, feel free to direct them to our website, stpete.com/advocacy, and we will share this out. And we'll see you next time.
Perfect. Thank you.
See y'all. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, John.
Have a great day.
Thank you.